Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Third Place Books from Our Living Rooms, this series of virtual events that we've been doing throughout this year. I am thrilled to be here tonight with a couple of authors we admire greatly and celebrating what we think of as a really important new book. My name is Sam. Many of you may know me from our stores in the Seattle area if you are familiar with them. I work for our events program here at Third Place Books with our stores in Lake Forest Park, Ravenna, and Seward Park. And if you're joining us from outside the Seattle area, welcome. One of the really cool things about the virtual events that we've been able to do this year is that they have brought people from all around the country to view our author events. And that is definitely part of our mission to make every place a third place where we can gather and discuss ideas and learn. So we thank you from wherever you are tonight. We're thrilled to have you here. I have just a couple of quick announcements to make before I get out of the way. And the first one is that we are here to celebrate books. And tonight, specifically, we're here to talk about Love, Zack. It's the new book from Reid Forgrave, his first book, and it just came out earlier this month, September 8th. Wonderful hardcover edition from our friends at Algonquin Books. If you would like to buy this book tonight, you can do so at the Buy the Book link. It's down there at the bottom of the screen. Reid's holding up a copy there right now. You can grab that book from us here at Third Place Books, and we will ship it to you anywhere in the country. USPS Media Mail, a service that Third Place Books and small businesses around the country rely on every day, and we thank them. Or if you're here in the Seattle area, we can also have that book available for you at one of our 3 neighborhood locations. You choose. And you can also pick up some other books that we're going to be talking about or the other related books tonight. So go ahead and hit that Buy the Book link, see what else we got. And we encourage you to make a book purchase. That is what allows us to keep doing what we're doing. And it is also what allows writers like Reid Forgrave and Michael Sokolove to keep writing and working and doing this kind of stuff. So we really appreciate your support. If you have a question tonight, you can plug it into the Ask a Question button down there at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the evening. And again, if we are doing a lot of these author events right now, so if there is something else that you think you'll enjoy, we encourage you to check out our website, thirdplacebooks.com. You can check out our events calendar. You can sign up for our email newsletter. Or you can follow us on social media at Third Place Books on most of the major platforms out there. And no matter what, we are sure to have something else going on that you'll enjoy. So we hope to see you back here very soon. And now, without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome these 2 wonderful authors we've got with us tonight to discuss Love, Zack, a really exciting, important new book that we are thrilled to have on the shelves here at Third Place Books. Reid Forgrave writes about sports and other topics for GQ, for the New York Times Magazine, and Mother Jones, among other publications. He's covered the NFL and college football for FoxSports.com and CBS Sports. He currently writes for the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. The article in which he first wrote about Zac Easter is included in Best American Sports Writing 2018. A past life found him writing at the Des Moines Register in Iowa, where he wrote long-form narrative journalism and covered the state's first-in-the-nation presidential caucuses. He now lives in Minneapolis with his wife and 2 sons, and Love, Zack is his first book. And joining Reid Forgrave tonight is Michael Sokolove. He is a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, the author of several previous books, including The Take It Out, Hustle, and Warrior Girls. He joins us tonight from Bethesda, Maryland. Please, from wherever you are, join me in welcoming Reid Forgrave and Michael Sokolove.
Thank you so much, Sam. I am super excited about helping Reid put his first book, out into the world. It's a fabulous book. And, as a nonfiction writer, you are looking often for 2 things. You're looking for a character or a series of great characters who are compelling, and you're looking to connect them to some larger story, some important story. And when I say important, I mean a story that is worth hearing, but is also compelling. And, he's got both of these things going in this book. It's a great read, and it's an important story about America. And I love the book. It's achingly sad, but it's not without hope, because it tells us something that we need to know, and it tells us something in a way that keeps you turning the pages. So Reid's going to do his thing here for 10 minutes or so and talk to you about the book. And then we're going to come together and talk a little bit and go back and forth. And he'll read a little bit from the book, and then we'll take some questions. So, Reid, take it away, man.
So I'm Reid. I'm a writer. I'm based in Minneapolis. Thank you guys so much for coming out virtually for this. I'm especially thrilled for this event for a couple of reasons. I live in Minneapolis now, but I did spend one of the best summers of my life as an intern at the Seattle Times, one of my absolute favorite cities on earth. And Third Place Books is just an absolutely incredible bookstore. So I'm thrilled to be here, even though it's virtual, in Seattle. And I'm thrilled to be doing this with Mike. Mike's a friend. I've known him for, 5 or 6 years. I met him when he was working on a book about John Calipari. And this was during a time when I was a college basketball writer, spending quite a bit of time at Kentucky, as you would imagine. And Mike is just one of the best people and one of the best writers I met. And I remember the very first time that I met him, there are all these journalists swarming around these 18, 19-year-olds, soon-to-be millionaires at University of Kentucky's basketball program. And I was like, you're Mike Sokolove? You're the one I want to talk to. And I think after 4 or 5 Kentucky bourbons later that night, we did quite well. And Mike was a huge part of this story of Zac Easter becoming a story in the first place. So Mike, it's a thrill that you're joining me. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this man named Zac Easter. He's the title character of my book, Love, Zack. And I wrote a 288-page book about someone who I never met. In fact, the first time I had ever heard of Zac Easter was in his obituary. It was right before Christmas of 2015. And I was back home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. I was visiting my family for the holidays with my wife and the first of our 2 sons. Second one has since been born. And I got an email from an old friend, and he had seen Zac's obituary in the Des Moines Register, a newspaper where I used to work. And he said, you should check this out. There could be something here. And I don't need to tell you this, but an obituary for a 24-year-old man, it's always heartbreaking. But Zac's was even more so. It struck me for so many reasons. You have this huge picture of Zac and his an enormous smile, and all these details that indicated an incredibly bright future should have been ahead for this young man. He just graduated from college with a 4.0 GPA. He was this decorated soldier in the Iowa National Guard. In fact, he had won Soldier of the Year in the entire National Guard just a couple years before. He was an enormous Green Bay Packers fan, and he was just so proud of his hunting prowess. He had this enormous 10-point buck that he had nabbed his senior year of high school, and that it was the best buck that any of the Eastermen had gotten, and he was so proud of that. But Zac couldn't see all his potential, because the only thing that he saw was a future where this brain disease that he had, that he blamed on playing football, by the way, only through high school. He saw a future where this brain disease would slowly destroy him. And 6 days before Christmas, Zac committed suicide. It was the final paragraph of this obituary that just grabbed me. And it made me realize that I had to find out more about this young man's tragic tale. And I'm going to read this final paragraph to you right now, because this is really the entry point that I had to Zac's tragic but very complicated life. And here's how it read. Zac was a selfless person. His last wish was to make sure that no one else has to struggle from head trauma like he did. It is important to Zac to tell his story about CTE, a disease he attempted to manage for years. He suffered from severe migraines, brain tremors, slurred speech, blurred vision, and dementia, among other physical ailments. He unselfishly is donating his brain along with a detailed diary that documented his life so that no one suffers the way that he did. He bravely fought this silent disease for years until he was no longer able. His spirit will always be with us. Zac asked that memorials be donated to the Concussion Legacy Foundation so that further research can be done on this disease. His final request is that people talk about CTE support more research, and value knowledge. So that's how I found myself on the first Sunday afternoon of 2016, sitting on the carpeted floor at Brenda and Miles Easter's living room. Mounted on this wall right beside me was Zac's prized 10-point buck. And on the television right behind me was the game between Zac's Green Bay Packers and his father's favorite team, the Minnesota Vikings. It had been about 2 weeks since their son had taken his father's 20-gauge shotgun and shot himself in the chest because he wanted to preserve his brain for science. The Easters, they live out in the timber and the cornfields, this beautiful plot of land outside the small town of Indianola, Iowa. And their family history on this land, it goes back to before the Civil War. They are very much of this place. Zac was a seventh-generation Iowan. And their version of what they thought manhood should be stems from generations of living off this land, working off this land. And this traditional version of masculinity, it became quickly apparent to me as I was spending hours talking with Zac's mom, talking with his father, talking with one of his brothers, talking with his girlfriend, talking to them about how his decade of playing football recklessly, fearlessly, from third grade through high school, how this had led to so many concussions, eventually led to his demise. This whole time that I'm talking with him for 4 hours, all the men in the room, this guy included, we kept sneaking glances at the TV to catch the score of the NFL game. And we kept looking at our phones to check our fantasy football scores. And that really struck me as, boy, this guy's story is full of meaning about America in modern times. I've spent a lot of my career examining human suffering. And I believe to my core that great meaning about the human condition can be derived from the lessons that we learn from tragedy. It's a weird talent, I know, but I'm really comfortable steering into people's pain. But I remember that from that very first afternoon when I met the Easter family, I could tell that there was something different, something special, something vital about Zac's story. The first part was that Zac had left behind these reams of journals that documented his decline. And his family courageously gave those journals to me. It was remarkable when I was looking through these journals to be able to watch in real time the mood swings, the ups and downs, the confusion, the unpredictable, often self-destructive nature of Zac's CTE. CTE, of course, stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's the brain disease that's become associated with athletes in contact sports, especially football, but certainly not limited to football. But beyond Zac's personal tragedy, I really thought this story illustrated, like I said, something about America. It's what he represents is, I think, what the modern day American man grapples with. This is a book about sports, but this is not a sports book. To me, it's a book about what it means to be a man in 21st century America. It's a book about parenting. I have two boys, age 4 and age 8, and I've spent so much time putting myself in Zac Easter's parents' shoes and how I would have reacted to that. It's a book about what fathers pass on to their sons. It's about that blurry line between traditional views of masculinity and where that crosses over into what's known as toxic masculinity. It's a book about our country's addiction to violence, frankly, not just in our sports, but in our everyday lives, how violence is just part of who we are as humans. And this is a book about, I think, what we value as a nation. Ultimately, what I hope most of all is that this is a book that honors Zac's dying wish, his wish to bring to the forefront his concerns about the safety of his sport that he and his family still deeply love. To Zac's dying day, he loved the sport of football, even though he blamed it for his demise. So I wanted to thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for listening to Zac's story and hopefully reading Zac's story. I want to end this part with the final words of one of these documents that Zac's parents gave to me. It's a 39-page typewritten document that Zac wrote, kind of an autobiography of sorts. He printed it off and he left it behind in his childhood bedroom before he took his own life. These are Zac's kind of his final words. Take it with grace and know that I love you all. Spread the word of mental illness and concussions, and over time, please spread my story. Great things can still happen from this event. Think of all the lives that can be saved if all of you come together and help people by spreading the word. So one of the big moments in this book was actually at Michael Sokolove's house. I don't know if you know this, Mike. I don't know if you remember this. It was around Memorial Day, 2016.
I certainly remember that.
We were in DC hanging. Your wife made like about the best gin and tonic that I've ever had in my life. And I remember talking to you because at this point I was working on a story for GQ and talking to you about it, being really excited, but also worried because at that point we didn't know if Zac tested positive for CTE.
Right. I do remember that question.
What would have happened if, he believes in his writings that he has CTE? What would have happened if turns out that the brain, the brain scans that they did, that actually Dr. Bennett Amalu was involved in, if it came back and said it turns out he didn't have CTE? And we left your house that night. My wife drove. I had a few too many of those gin and tonics. And I remember checking my email when I got back into the car, and it was an email from Zac's mother saying that they got the brain test back and that he did, in fact, test positive for CTE. And his family was strangely relieved, I guess, by that news.
I do remember that now. And, of course, because we writers, we prepare. I had some questions prepared, but listening to you, just now in this great presentation, a couple of things just really hit me. First of all, did you say that you were in his house 2 weeks after his death?
Yeah.
Somehow that had escaped me. That, as a fellow journalist, just puts me in awe. And of course, you weren't just there, you brought your own humanity, because you can't fake that. You bring your own humanity as a way to get people to talk with you. I mean, we journalists, we're all selfish in some ways.
Egos.
We want the story, we want the material, but you have to be, look, it's the end of Yom Kippur, you have to be a mensch. You have to be a decent human being, which you are, and then some. But how on earth did you get yourself to that house, and get yourself entry to that house, and then entry to Zac's story? How did you get them to trust you?
No, it's a great question, and honestly, like this book, so much of this comes back to the fact that Zac left behind these, extensive writings and frankly, instructions to his family, telling them in, plain spoken English as you can get, share my story, tell people about me. I think with suicide, there's so much stigma built up with it, so much shame, but Zac's family I don't want to say they were able to get over it, but they immediately, right after his death, they had a charge that they knew they had to make meaning from this tragedy. So I after I saw the obituary, I still had contacts in Iowa. We had just moved up to Minneapolis, but I knew a few people in this town. I called everyone I could to try to get in touch with Zac's mom, and she called me back. I think it was right before Christmas, shortly after his funeral, and said, come visit us. And I was, on the phone call, I was really nervous. I think you should be. Like, you're right. It's human. You have to be human. You can't fake that stuff.
Yeah.
But like all through the reporting of this book, his family's, their desire to not just tell his story and be like, oh, we had this great son who was such a, naive, devious, wonderful kid who, was just like this perfect middle child who just get in trouble all the time, but in the most innocent sorts of ways. They wanted to tell the bad parts of his story, because that's where I think it can get really hard. And I remember that very first time, I spent 4 hours with his family. We're talking about his life. We're talking about his death. And at one point, they started talking about his first suicide attempt, which had been 5 weeks before his completed suicide attempt. And I'm going to read the prologue of my book, is that first suicide attempt. And they started talking about it. And Zach's older brother, one of his two brothers were there. And the older brother who was there was like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't think we should talk about that. And as a journalist, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to steer into that. And I found out later he didn't want to talk about that because it was like, it was like a very public scene that happened at this park, and the police were called, and Zack got taken to a psych hospital. But he didn't want that out there because he didn't want his grandparents to hear it, which I thought was like just such an authentic reason for being uncertain about airing that dirty laundry. But the family, I use the word courageous in my opening spiel, and they are. That's courageous to be able to. There's some embarrassing stuff in this book about the family, especially about Zack. But I think they knew right from the beginning that having that sort of embarrassing, dark stuff that's the whole point. That this disease.
It also occurred to me in reading the book and in listening to you just now, for all of the ways in which Zack was compromised by his brain injury, and also not an intellectual, not a group, to begin with. I mean, and I were a farm kid and wanted to play football, very smart. He was super sophisticated about what was going on with his brain.
Yeah.
His family was not.
No.
And we can talk about his father in a moment because I'm curious about some things. So he was super sophisticated. Then in 2 weeks, they're like letting you in. It's just, I don't, how do you account for that?
So
there's like a little bit of a gap there. That sophistication on their part, in some ways, you could say would have been better put to use a little earlier. I hate to say that, but
I think one part of why they were so open and trusting of me is because this sounds maybe a little callous, but I was sort of the first one in the door, and I became part of their story, right? Where it's like, hey, we have the priest who helps us out. We have the aunts who are helping us send thank you notes for the funeral, and we have the neighbors who are bringing food, and we have this reporter who comes by every once in a while and asks all these questions. I sort of like became embedded in that way. But the bigger point there is their lack of sophistication. Not like intellectual sophistication, just not knowing about CTE. There was a specific moment in the book. Zack's 24th birthday, his final birthday, was June 2015, 6 months before he took his own life. And he had been struggling with this, but he was so good at hiding it. And his parents saw his struggles, but I was an idiot when I was 24 years old. I was drinking too much and getting in trouble, and I'm sure my parents had the same feelings that Zack's parents had, which was like, he's just growing up. He's learning to be a man and live in this world. I think that's where Zack's parents were until his birthday dinner, where he meets his parents, and they're it's like a sports bar in town, and he says, "Mom and Dad, I think I have this brain disease, CTE." And his parents they're just very different personalities. I respect and admire both his mom and his dad for very different reasons. His mom is frankly a lot like my mom, where she's like, all right, let's fix it. And immediately she's like, okay, I'm going to go to your doctor's appointments with you. You know the type, like half of America, right? Like, okay, son, we're going to get on top of this. And, here's our 8-point plan, which at times would annoy Zack, but it was also like, he knew he had someone in his corner. His dad, it's a little bit more complicated because his dad was a Division I football player, grew up, worshiping the sport of football. He was a small college coach, and then he was defensive coordinator for Zack's high school team for all three of his sons. He told me like there came a point where it was like he felt he loved football more than his sons did when he was coaching.
Reid, that was one of my questions for you. When I read the book, and I just reviewed it, again today, and I remember when I read the book, I was angry at his dad a lot of the time because there's a real question as to whether, he clearly loves his son. His dad loves his son.
Yeah.
But you have to question at times when you read the book whether he loves his son more than he loves football. And even after his son's death, he's proud of the way that Zack played. He was a whomper. He was a thumper. He's, just smeared people. I'm looking at my other screen here. He was reckless. And this is afterward where we know the things that the specific way that Zack played, we now know is the wrong way to play. And a lot of people knew even then that it was the wrong way to play. And his father is a football guy, the American male from the Midwest, who even now talks about, well, maybe he shouldn't have played that way, but the sport does feel sissified to me. So as a writer, how did you keep from being angry? You're not judgmental in the book, nor are you sentimental. You are telling a story in a beautiful way and the way it needed to be told. But one of the things I'm imagining you had to govern yourself on a little bit is not being angry at his father. But I have to say, as a reader, sometimes I was.
You were not the first person that said that to me. In fact, my book editor, said the same thing.
Right.
I push back on that a little bit as far as feeling angry. One is his dad. He's not the most in touch with his emotions type of guy. He's big and he's not going to go to therapy. I mean, like, there's one point, like, after Zach's death where he says, I don't need no fucking therapy. What he does for therapy, drinks a few beers, goes out with his dogs and his shotgun and hunts in the backyard. He's a, very, whatever word you want to use, traditional masculinity or toxic masculinity. He's old school, right?
Fine line.
Yeah, fine line, very blurry. But he's tortured by this. He is absolutely tortured by this. I think the context here is, look at when Zack graduated from high school, 2010, that's just as Zach's senior year of high school. That's right when Jean Marie Lascas's story came out in GQ that eventually became the book Concussion and the movie Concussion. That's right when that came out in GQ. Mike Webster, his story was out there, but I think there was a lot of denialism, especially from the NFL at first. I think the NFL has fully come around, but they've come around to.
They've definitely changed.
Yeah, for sure.
They've definitely changed.
It's an existential question for their business and their sport. But and I think it was right around then that Alan Schwartz was writing the first stories in the New York Times about CTE and its connection with football. If Zach's dad didn't have the sort of the ignorance, like the fact that he could legitimately say we didn't know, I think he would be even more tortured by this. It is interesting because, like, Zach's mom, if she never sees another football game in her life, she'll be happy. She's like, our grandkids are not going to play football. His dad, though, he still holds on to some of that.
Yeah. I think one of the beauties of this book is its regionalism. And I don't mean regionalism by only people from that part of the country should read it. I mean that it's informed by the fact that this part of the country in your bones. And, for instance, as an Easterner, like when I read that, he'd gone out pheasant hunting at 5 years old with his dad, I'm like, at 5 years old, but that's not unusual. And I just wrote a piece for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago on the cover of the Sunday Review section about the rural vote in Pennsylvania in a region called the Endless Mountains. This is an important part of our country. It's not Seattle. It's not Washington, D.C. It's not New York. And this book is about that.
Mm-hmm.
This book is about that as much as it's about football. And for better or worse, people are different. People think differently. Guns are a big part of it, whether they're for hunting or just to have. And and you address that. I mean, this book is about masculinity. But what are your feelings about? We live in a violent society. We live in a society that is demonstrably more violent than any other Western democracy.
Yeah.
So, book doesn't say that. I don't think it does say that pretty directly. What part does football play in that, and how much thought have you given to that?
A lot. I mean, one of my favorite parts of researching this book was learning about the history of football and how it parallels America's growth into a superpower, because football comes around right after the Civil War, right? And it's very much like a manhood test, right? You don't have the war to go prove your manhood, but football is basically like simulated war. And I think that's, to me, football and the military, plus to some extent like corporate America, they're all really tied in together because it's simulated war. And I do think that the sport is very much tied into the Make America Strong ethos. You can see like Teddy Roosevelt in early 1900s talking about his fear if they were going to eliminate football, because football was such a violent sport back then. 36 people died in 1905. They convene all these college presidents at the White House, and Teddy Roosevelt says, you got to clean up this game or America's going to reject it. And that was the birth of the NCAA. Which I think is just so fascinating. But one of the things that Teddy Roosevelt said is like, he doesn't want, his alma mater was Harvard, and he doesn't want his school to stop football and then turn out mollycoddles instead of men, which is my favorite word in this entire book is mollycoddle. But like Zach's dad has that sort of same mentality, right? Where it's like, this is what men do. We're tough. We carry on. If we hurt a little bit in our arm or in our head, we don't complain about it. We just keep going. And I still think there's some worth in that. And I'm trying to teach my sons to be tough. Like we had a big conversation today before they got flu shots. It's like, you got to be tough, kid. But at the same time, there is some like toxicity.
And we've grown up with sports being the place you learn to be tough. And it's a lifelong conversation, I think. With my wife and with a lot of our wives, my daughter was a college swimmer, and I remember in her mid-teens when she walked out of the house to swim at championship meet with 101 fever, and we let her walk out the door. I was like, well, she's tough. Well, she swam terribly, but she swam. She trained for it. And so football is part of that for men. This is a very intimate book in many ways. I mean, you have the diary, which is the most intimate thing to have. First of all, I'm curious the process of getting that diary. Did they give it to you that first day that you were there?
Not that first day. So it was early January. I was covering college basketball, and I had this like basically one day where I was driving through Iowa on the way to Lawrence, Kansas. I'm like, I'll spend the day with you guys. So I was originally thinking I was writing for foxsports.com and doing TV on Fox Sports 1. And I originally thought, hey, this will be a 2,500 word story, maybe a 5 or 10 minute TV documentary, mini documentary about a family that is going through a topical thing. I basically just thought of it as like a family gets through a hard time. And then they mentioned that diary that very first time, and I was like, whoa. I come out of that first meeting being like, and I asked them, I was like, I'd love to see that. I'd love to really try to deconstruct it. And immediately, thankfully, Fox Sports 1 said no to doing a story about it, so that I ended up pitching us a magazine piece.
Yeah.
Thank God. But I told the family, I was like, look, I'd like to have some phone calls with you guys. I can't be back here until after the Final Four in April. But I think it was the weekend after the Final Four, I went and spent 4 or 5 days in Iowa, just set up a whole ton of interviews and slept on my friend's couch, and didn't have that good Fox expense account for my writing on spec story. And I went down there to find, and the first thing I did is they gave me, I think it was like just like a big plastic carton full of diaries and all these folders. I had no idea what it was. It had his laptop in it, and I posted up in a conference room at the college where his dad used to coach for like 6 hours going through all these. And I remember the first few that I'm looking through, like one of them was like this motivational book where he was reading Tony Robbins motivational stuff and writing down, my 10 ways to become a great, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, but isn't really,
right.
It's not like, holy crap, this is the first. Then another one is like his health records and a bunch of his scrawling on that. And I remember when I opened up this black 5-star Mead notebook, and it says at the top, I think it was June 2nd, 2015, and it's his story. It's basically like, "Hey, Mr. Diary, nice to meet you. I'm Zack. I've never done this before, but this is a way that I can record." And I remember going through that and just being like, "Oh my God," because you just see it. It's day to day. He goes down.
Just let you take these things away, or you just look.
I took pictures of them on my phone, and they knew I was, and I emailed them right to myself, worrying that but yeah, they've been. I mean, the family has been awesome.
And the other thing that makes this such an intimate book is there's his girlfriend and his mother, the two. Well, those are the two main women characters in the book, and then there's the third one who was the trainer, who was an amazing character, and that's the way you tell this really from a 360, because the trainer, the athletic trainer at the school, was trying to keep Zack off the field and meeting all kinds of opposition to that.
She was a woman in a man's world, and she came there in like 2005, 2006. And she's the lady who starts saying to these players, "Give me your helmet. You're not going back on the field." And instead of parent, because concussion, you can't see. It's not like your arm's hanging down. And instead of parents thanking her and being like, "Thank you for keeping my son out of danger," parents would yell at her, be like, "Get Jimmy back in the game." And there was a town doctor who was in the stands for one of these games when she took the star, I think it was the star wide receiver, took his helmet. And the doctor called the superintendent and said, "What's this lady doing? What are her qualifications?" It's only 15 years ago, but it was a totally different culture back then.
Yeah.
In small towns in America, right?
So I think I've got the progression right here. Do you want to read something, and then if anybody's got any questions, we'll hit them, and if not, we'll pick them back up. Does that work?
Perfect. So I'm going to read. I feel like I should give everyone a little bit of a trigger warning because this is an intense scene. This is how I open the book, the prologue. It's short, maybe 6 or 7 minutes, but it is Zack's first suicide attempt 5 weeks before his completed suicide attempt. And I think it really gets into a lot of the themes of this book pretty quickly. Zac Easter stood on the long wooden dock leading out onto Lake Aquabi, gripping the .40 caliber pistol he'd given his dad for Father's Day not even 5 months before. The sun had dipped over the horizon on the other side of the Y-shaped lake. Leaves lay in heaps on the fringe of the woods. The gusty November winds died down as the sun sank on the horizon, but there was still a chill in the air. Winter was coming. Zack took out his phone and snapped a picture. He posted it to Snapchat, ignoring the frantic phone calls that were pouring into his phone. "God bless America," he captioned the photo. Where is Zack? All around Zack's hometown, friends and family were terrified. They'd seen his Facebook post a few minutes before. "If you're reading this, then God bless the times we've had together. Please forgive me. I'm taking the selfish road out. Only God understands what I've been through. I will always watch over you." They needed to stop him, but how? They didn't even know where he was. From the house where Zack grew up, a few miles away and amidst fields of corn, his parents called. Zack did not pick up. From the small town just down the street, where Zack had played high school football, and from Des Moines, the big capital city not quite 20 miles to the north, his friends called. Zack did not pick up. At 5:36 p.m., a college roommate texted him, "Hey, what are you up to, bud?" No reply. From the law school at Case Western Reserve University, almost 700 miles away in Cleveland, Ohio, Allie Epperson, Zack's girlfriend and the only person to whom he had fully confided his struggles with his rapidly deteriorating brain, called. Zack did not pick up. She called again. He did not pick up. She called again. Finally, Zack picked up. There was terror in his voice. "I can't do this," he told her. "It's never going to get better." Allie, a vivacious law student who in many ways was Zack's opposite, a bleeding heart liberal who balanced out Zack's dyed-in-the-wool conservatism, was freaking out. How many hours had she spent on the phone with him, talking about the disease that seemed to be eating his brain from the inside? How many times had the two talked about the sport he loved, the sport that had consumed much of his childhood, but now seemed to be consuming the rest of his life as well? How many times had she told him that a real man was not stoic and unfeeling, that a real man must face his demons instead of suffering silently in deference to some antiquated ideal of masculinity. How many times had she told him not to apologize to her, that she loved him despite the crazy stuff that was going on, and that they would work through it all together. Earlier on this day, Friday the 13th of all days, in November 2015, he had apologized again. "I'm sorry you fell in love with a guy with a ducked up brain," Zack had texted her, his phone's autocorrect softening the swear word. He'd awoken early, started drinking, and called Allie in a panic late in the morning, shit-faced and swerving his car around the suburbs. She'd coaxed him to drive into a gas station, then into a Jimmy John's to grab a sandwich and sober up. She'd calmed him like she always did. He'd apologized like he always did. She had texted him back, "You can't choose who you fall in love with. You just fall in love." Then he'd texted an ominous reply. "If anything happens to me, just by chance of luck, tell my family everything." Now things were happening. A friend noticed the setting of Zack's Snapchat photo, the beach on Lake Aquabi, where Zack and Allie had escaped to in the summer to get away from high school friends and stare at the clouds. The lake was just down the road from his family's house. The lake's name is derived from an ancient Algonquian language. It means resting place. Allie kept Zack on the phone. "Listen to the sound of my voice," she soothed him. "Listen to the sound of my voice." "I'm losing my mind," he cried. "This is it for me." One Warren County Sheriff's Office cruiser came speeding down the winding hill toward the lake, followed by another. "Allie, did you send those cops here?" The cops got closer to him. He started apologizing to Allie, and he told her he wanted his brain donated for research. Then Zack's phone cut out. Out on the dock, Zack pointed the pistol at the darkened sky and fired a warning shot. That is when a pickup truck sped down the hill and slammed to a stop next to the lake. Zack's father, a burly former high school football coach named Michael Easter, jumped out. The parking lot quickly filled with squad cars. One deputy, a former all-conference linebacker who'd played for Miles on the same high school team Zack played for, trained his assault rifle on Zack. Lasers from other police rifles danced on Zack's body. The evening was dark and it was getting cold. Miles saw the cherry red 2008 Mazda 3 Zack called Old Red. He peered into the window of his son's car. He saw an empty six-pack of Coors Light, an empty bottle of Captain Morgan rum, and a pill bottle. Floodlights illuminated Zack. A black curtain fell on the water behind him. Zack stood up from a picnic table and walked down the pier toward a wooden fishing hut at water's edge. A few more steps and he'd be inside, alone on the water, out of sight. "Put your gun down," the deputy shouted. "Nope," Zack yelled with an anguished laugh. "Not going to do that." In a flash, Zack's father realized what was happening. Zack wants the police to shoot him. "Fuck it," Miles said to himself. "I can't let this happen." Zack's father sprinted past the sheriff's deputies and onto the pier. "Zack," he shouted. "If he shoots me, he shoots me," the father thought. "Dad, stop!" As Miles Easter ran toward his son, Zack's face came into focus. His blue eyes looked foggy and confused. The expression on his still boyish face matched the tenor of his voice. Sad, sick, exhausted, scared, worn down by life, beaten once and for all. "Zack, I'm coming," Miles said. "Put your gun down." "Dad," Zack shouted. "Dad, stop!" Then, gripping his father's pistol, Zack disappeared into the fishing hut. The door slammed shut behind him, and Zac Easter was alone.
It's an amazing passage. It's just an amazing feat of reporting and recreating, and it's powerful and just sad. So if anybody out there has any questions, I think I should see them on my screen. I have a couple more questions.
Well, one thing I was going to say about that, I think like bringing up his father, his dad. A lot of people say what you said. They're like, why is his dad so worshipful of football? But I purposely started with that passage because you see him, despite blaming himself to some extent, you see him showing his love for his son and his concern there, even in a way that he doesn't know how to express. So yeah, anyway.
Well, this is what made you an extraordinary person to write this book, because you see that, and I know that you're right. It would have been harder, I think, for me to get past some of that. And so you were the right book found you. So you mentioned to me when we talked on the phone earlier that his mother had written you a note. Can you share what her thoughts about the book?
Yeah, she was terrified of reading it in the weeks leading up. The book came out September 8th, and she told me that she was having nightmares again. She's a very emotive person, very much, sort of the opposite of his dad, very much in touch with her emotions. And yeah, she was very, very worried for the book coming out. She was on the book launch. I'm trying to find the text right now. And she sent me just a very brief but very lovely note that said, "Great job, Reid. Grace, poise, and truth make you a perfect person to tackle CTE," which is like brief, but I was terrified what the family would think of this book. I didn't want them. They did not have pre-publication review. I didn't want them to see the book until it was out. Unfortunately, there was this like mix-up with the publisher, and they mailed Brenda and Allie a copy in July, I think. And I was like, oh, I don't want them to read it yet.
Oh, that's hard.
I was worried, and it turned out Allie had she I don't want to say she loved it because it was very painful, but like she appreciated the book and found it accurate, and she had one factual correction that we were able to fix, and it was like a day, it was Saturday instead of Friday. Right. And his mom, and this was previous to them getting the book, but there was one personal detail that she asked that I leave out of the story. It's actually about his dad. And I said, of course, like absolutely, of course.
Well, that's the highest compliment there is, when people who were there feel that you got it right. And of course, the parts that you're trying to get right are, yes, of course, the facts, but mostly the emotional tenor and the truth of it. And, when you hear that as a writer, it's everything. I remember I wrote a book several books back about Darryl Strawberry's high school baseball team. And I went out to LA and I gave a reading at a bookstore called Isawan, which is a black bookstore, African-American bookstore, and almost never has white authors. And there I was, and there the whole team was, and I feel like, and I had just sent this guy, and I felt like my characters had come to life, and there they were, and it's a very, very nervous, because you're a writer, you didn't live these events, and you just doing the best you can, and so for his mom and for Allie to have felt that you got to the truth of it is a higher compliment than any review. What about his dad?
I actually haven't heard from him. I've done a better job keeping in touch with his parents are together, and but I've more been asking Brenda, his mom, about how the dad is doing. That's just
he's not
relationships.
So as long as you haven't heard any bad things, you're probably all right.
Exactly. But I think his dad. Someone sent me a note after the story came out. Not in their immediate family, but like in the town that knows the family very well, and said something like, his dad is taking this harder than anyone, but nobody knows it. So he just keeps it all in, which is so, and as a dad, I couldn't be more different than Miles Easter. Like if you gave me a shotgun, I'd accidentally shoot a hole in the window, I drink IPAs when he's drinking Coors Light, right? Couldn't be more different. But I felt like this deep bond with him while reporting this book, just because of the father-son thing. And I keep thinking of my younger son, is 4 years old, and when Brenda would describe what Zack was like as a little kid, I'm like, oh, that's Lincoln, man. Like Lincoln's like devious and so cute and a little bit of a maniac, but always in like this loving way. And he loves everybody and everybody loves him, but he has this sort of streak in him. And
So are you still watching football?
yeah, which is
I can't defend that I'm watching it, but I am.
Are you still watching football?
Yeah, I do, and I can't defend it because I think they have tried to make the game safer, but I think it just manufactures brain injuries.
So here's I think the question with football, and this is sort of like where I land on at the end of this book, because this book is, as you know, Mike, is not an anti-football book. If anything, I might have gone a little bit too easy on football because I was trying to explain Zach's and his family's point of view on this. But what I've landed on is you can legislate out of the game those big hits to the head that they used to put out, those like NFL films videos, bone crunching hits, and where they'd say on ESPN, he just got jacked up. You can legislate those out of the game and they've done a passable, if not good job over the past.
Good job of that.
You can't legislate subconcussive hits out of the game. And that is where I think this becomes an existential question for the NFL, because if we can get science to say, that this is exactly how much football affects your brain capacity later in life. If there can, and the science on this is all very, very young. Like the brain is the final frontier in science, more or less. Right. But that, I think, is where football in a generation or two could become, if not gone altogether, could become like boxing, like sort of a fringe sport.
I think so. So I'm sure you've been asked this before, but I have to ask: Would you let your sons play football?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and my cop-out answer is it doesn't matter what I think, so my wife's not going to let him. But
that's a true answer, I'm sure.
Total cop-out, but true answer. But I mean, the truth is, right now, I'd say no, because given their athletic genes in the family, they'll probably be a high-level Division I player, but not an right? Okay, no, they'd be sitting the bench on JV. But right now I say no. But it's a whole different thing when I watch football. I watch the Vikings lose every Sunday, and I'll often watch them with my sons around, especially Lincoln. He doesn't seem particularly interested this year, but in the past couple of years he has. And it's one thing when I say now my 4-year-old's not going to play football when he grows up. It's a whole different thing when he's 14 and we've been watching football together for a decade and all his friends are trying out for the team. And they're like, come on, man, this is going to be fun. And you see all these benefits of football, of the camaraderie and of the, football as metaphor for becoming a man. What am I going to say when he says, I want to try out for the team? And I say, no, football's too dangerous. And he says, then why have you been watching it with me for the past decade? That'd be a more difficult conversation. I don't know. I would. Sean Spooner is the doctor in this book who treated Zack, this fascinating guy who's in the Navy in Afghanistan, ran a concussion clinic in Afghanistan. And he had a son a few years older than my sons who wanted to play football. And this is a doctor who's seen a lot of concussion stuff. And what he said is he tried to talk his son out of it and tried to present other things, but he says ultimately he was going to leave it up to him. And he did leave it up to him. And the son ended up choosing soccer instead.
Which may not be entirely safe. I've got a grandson playing soccer and he's very, very good. And, they're not allowed to head the ball yet because, there's some thoughts about that. And, look, these are existential questions. Everything entails some risk. We're dealing with that as a society right now with coronavirus, and people have different ideas about risk as it relates to our health. Football seems to entail considerably more risks, but not the only one that does.
Well, you hear people say you can get a concussion riding your bike down the street. It's 100% true, but it's not baked into biking down the street that
But
you.
as you know, a lot of the science says that it is the subconcussive repeated hits that do the damage. So, and those, it's hard to imagine how they would be legislated out of the game. Now, we may discover later that's not the case.
Yeah.
But as of now, that's what a lot of the science seems to indicate, and that's just basic blocking and tackling.
Yep. No one's gonna. The way you legislate that out of the game is to turn it into flag football, and flag football is just not as fun. Not to watch.
It's not fun at all. Football is really fun. I played a little bit, and it was fun. And a lot of boys just want to hit things.
It's true.
And we can have a long discussion about why that is. But I mean, there was one year when I decided I was going to play soccer, and I watched, and soccer practice started like a week later. I was in 8th grade, and I watched like football practice starting, and guys were smacking into each other. And I said, let me see if they'll still give me some equipment because I want to play football again. It's just weird, and it's I don't want to step into it's biological or whatever. I don't know what it is, but it is a fact.
It's totally biological, right? Like I would imagine that my guess, I say this not as a biologist. Yeah, I mean, I did not play organized football, but I played a lot of backyard football. And being an idiot in high school, we used to play backyard tackle football without helmets. And I played baseball throughout high school. I played golf with all my high school friends, one of whom I believe is on this call right now. And the single most gratifying moment of my sports career was playing backyard football. And there was this cocky kid who played for the high school team. And Pat Kennedy was his name. And I remember literally knocking him out, like knocking the wind out of him when I tackled him, and he fumbled, blah, blah, blah. It was a backyard football game. And I still remember the feeling from that moment 25 years later, right?
Yeah.
Which is maybe it's a little pathetic that that's the highlight of my sports career, but it's also like it says something about violence, and we get some gratification from it, frankly.
Well, and I mean, I guess the argument for football is that it's an organized way to exercise, maybe exercise with an R or an O-R rather, to exercise some of that, out of ourselves. Although, I do go back to football and guns, and I'm sure I'm giving away my coastal elite self, but football and guns and violence, they do seem linked, and that's not biological. That's cultural, or it may be cultural.
Yep. There's a book that I read some weird like sociology books in researching this. And there's this sociology book that I read with a guy who went and lived with this tribe in Papua New Guinea that was a completely nonviolent tribe. And the question that he was trying to answer in his book is whether violence and our predisposition to being a violent species, whether that is innate or whether it's learned. And, he uses this tribe to make the argument that it's all learned.
Well, there you go. So, I don't know if we have any questions. I think we've done.
I think we're good. If anyone else wants to join in, here's your last
shot, man. What's the guy you knocked out? Is he on the line? Come on.
He's registered as Frank Nobilo, which is a good inside joke. Yeah, old-time golfer.
There you go.
But I just want to thank you guys for coming. This is I wish it were in person, and maybe for the paperback version it can be, because I love Seattle. Like I said, one of my favorite cities in the entire country.
Cool. Thanks.
Reid, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you. And indeed, next time in Seattle in person for your next book or paperback or who knows, but we can't wait to have you out here. Thank you, Mike Sokolove, and thank you to everyone out listening tonight and taking the time to join us. Again, there's the buy the book button. It's that nice kind of turquoise button at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that. You can purchase a brand new hardcover copy of Love, Zack. It's the new book from Zac Forgrave, or from Reid Forgrave, I'm sorry. And we will ship that book to you anywhere in the country. You can also have that book available to pick up here at Third Place Books, and we thank you so much for your support. Reid Forgrave, Michael Sokolove, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It was a pleasure. And to all of you out there, be safe, do good work, read good books, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thanks, y'all.